Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I'm going to continue on with my World of Astrology, but I thought I might go even deeper because I'm going to start with where it all began and how I ended up in Dallas, Texas. So this is probably going to be my most personal and most difficult story to tell because it really does involve some deep, deep things. And I know the reason why I'm coming out with this story is a lot of you might relate to a lot of this story because it deals with a subject that is very difficult for really all of us to handle for some reason, but it's about money. And let me start with the fact that my mother was from New Orleans and my dad was from Ohio, and they met in New Orleans because he was in the war. And he was stationed, they were all stationed there in New Orleans because that was like a port. And my mother loved all of the servicemen coming to New Orleans because that was where all these handsome men in uniform were all of a sudden in her city. And she had plenty of dates, let me tell you. But that's how they met because of the war. A very different story from my mother-in-law's story. My husband, Daniel, he was born in France. He was born close to Paris, in a city outside of Fontainebleau. So, but his mother, during the same time, in France, they were helping the Jews escape in World War II. And what happened was they lived close to the Swiss border. And when the trains would come and slow down and stop right there at the Swiss border, they would run and open the doors, and the Jews were able to run and escape, to the effect that my mother-in-law actually saw her brother gunned down and killed in the process of doing these heroic feats back in the day. Very, very extreme. And she did later on in her life, or maybe after she died, got a Medal of Honor for the heroic acts that they did to free the Jews. But here's my mother in New Orleans just living it up and not even realizing they really didn't know what was going on in Germany and France at the time. There wasn't the media presence that we have today. So, but that's just a whole nother story in and of itself. But going back, my sisters were born in New Orleans, and then my uncle asked my father to come to Dallas because in Dallas, they were going to start a company together. And my maiden name is Mailer, and it's pronounced Mahler from Germany, but when you came to the United States after World War II, you didn't want to have a German name, so it was pronounced Mailer instead of Mahler, like the composer. That's my maiden last name, M-A-H-L-E-R. So anyway, going back to the beginnings, my uncle said, come to Dallas, we'll start this business together. I have a great idea. So my father picked up everything, brought my mother to Dallas. My mother hated Dallas, and she let my dad know it their whole lives. She said Dallas didn't have the culture New Orleans did. And that's probably true, but I'm glad. I was the only one born in Dallas. My sisters were not. So we came to Dallas, and my father started this business with his brother. And it was, interestingly enough, called the John G. Mailer Company. So leaving my father's name out conveniently. Anyway, this was what they did. Was they had exotic leathers. So what I mean by exotic was lizard and snake and elephant, all the exotic leathers. But ostrich was the big deal, because my uncle was smart enough to get a business deal going where he got exclusive rights to the ostrich skins from South Africa. And with that, they made cowboy boots. They didn't actually make the boots. They sold the leathers to the companies in Texas, El Paso, San Antonio. I mean, all the big boot companies. The only way that they got ostrich skin was through my father and uncle's company. And in the 80s, let me bring you up to the 80s, it was the hottest thing to have a pair of ostrich boots. So my uncle had the exclusive rights to ostrich skins. And let me tell you, he made, I say he instead of we, but it was an extraordinarily successful business. And my uncle, and we became fairly rich, but my uncle became exceedingly rich. So my mother was always really angry at my father and his brother because they were supposed to be business partners. And somehow my dad got kind of pushed down to being more or less an employee than a partner. But let me tell you, my uncle, well, let me just say, we lived a great life. We were above middle class. I always thought, that was normal. I would bring friends over to my house, and we had a swimming pool back in the 50s and the 60s, and that was unheard of. And I remember my friends going, "You live in a mansion." And I was like, "What? This is kind of normal." But let me tell you something. It wasn't really a mansion. It was really nice. My uncle's house was a mansion. My uncle lived the life of the rich and famous. His house was on Park Lane in Dallas back in the day. That was the street where all the wealthy mansions were. There weren't a million mansions like there are today. Back then, when you bought a house, you didn't have all this money where you could borrow it from banks. You pretty much had to have the money for the house. And there weren't that many wealthy houses. So, but they didn't have children. And I'll never forget, my aunt would take me to Neiman Marcus and buy me these beautiful dresses. And it was such a big deal. But their company grew because it's kind of like diamonds. Diamonds, they make them rare because they allocate them. And that's what they did with ostrich skin. So any leather that was ostrich skin came from his company. So I mean to tell you, they would bring him to the White House. He would donate money to the president. I mean, he was high rolling it. Even to the point when they would travel on business trips, get this, my uncle was always in first class and made my dad sit in coach, to give you an idea of how that dynamic worked. But my whole point in telling you this story is that my mother was so jealous. And they had no kids. And let me tell you, what they do, and a lot of people with money do this, or at least they did, and I think nothing's changed. Let me say this right now. When it comes to money, always strings are attached, right? But my uncle would always make these big promises, and I always called it, he's dangling that carrot again, because he'll never give it to you. I was promised a pony on their ranch. Yes, they had houses and ranches, a ranch in Sedona. They had a ranch in Arkansas. They just had so many houses and so much, and no children. But I was always promised all these things. Never delivered, but that's the dangling of the carrot. So My point is, my mother became so obsessed with money. And she told me one time, growing up as a kid, there is nothing in the world that matters more than money. Oh my God, that stuck with me. And anytime I did something, the strings were attached. And it's so funny because she would say, oh, I want to buy you that bracelet. I was like, no, because I knew I had to pay for it emotionally. If I got that bracelet, there was the strings attached. I had to do this, I had to do that. And she would actually at times say, I'm going to change the will. That was hung over your head if you didn't do what you were supposed to or what she wanted to do. She always told me to marry a rich man. It's easier to marry someone rich than someone poor. What did I do? You got it. I rebelled with all of it. And let me tell you something. I acquired a hatred for money. Because what I associated money with was pain and suffering and all of the strings that were attached. They made you feel bad. I gave you this and I gave you that, you know? And so it's funny because later on in my career as an astrologer, I read for some of the most famous people. I can't give names, but one of them, his father, was the most famous actor in the world in the 60s. Trust me, this is true. And I got to be pretty close to him. And I read his chart all the time. And he and I both confirmed, because we got to be friends to the point where it wasn't just readings. We would go out when I'd go to LA and stuff and go to parties. And he told me, he equated money with suffering, just like I did. That's true. People, you just don't know this whole world and dichotomy of money. And let me tell you, I've seen the worst of the worst with the money situation and the strings that are attached and the hierarchy of the people that have money and the way it all works. It made me sick. So to make a long story short, once my parents died, and let me tell you, I took care of them to the day they died. I lived next door to them for the last 10 years of their life. I don't know how many times we had to have ambulances out to the house because someone would fall and, they're almost dead and then they revive and then it just went on for 10 years. And, it gets really, you're a caretaker. And that means, even changing diapers towards the end, but I would never let my parents go to a home. And they had the funds to stay at home, so I stayed there. Of course, I had help when I would fly and things like that, but still, I took care of them. When my parents passed, the will was read, and I'm telling you, everything that I inherited from my parents, and of course, everything, the brothers-in-law and the sisters, everything becomes a big fight. It always does. But after it was all said and done, and I got the amount that I got, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to open up a French restaurant? Because my husband's father was a famous chef from France. He was brought to the United States to open up the old Warsaw in Dallas, and then proceeded to have his own restaurant, which was called Patry's. And it was the best French restaurant in all of Dallas. And let me tell you a little bit about Dallas too, back in the day. Dallas is the place of industry and new beginnings in companies. You have no idea how many businesses had their start here. The John G. Mailer Company did. But Southwest Airlines started in Dallas. Neiman Marcus started in Dallas. Did you know that AT&T started in Dallas? Texas Instruments started in Dallas. And even Frito-Lay, the list goes on and on. This is a place of industry and new beginnings. And really, back in the oil days, what you don't know is that the oil was first discovered in East Texas, then it was discovered in South Texas by the coast in Houston. So then they find the biggest oil reserve. Actually, did you know that in Midland, Texas, and this is where my son works, I'm Christian, he has an oil company out there. And in Midland, Texas, because of the fracking, and I know it's not good, I agree with you totally, but I'm in Texas, just hear me out, that because of fracking, that means I can go deeper. They found the biggest oil reserve in the Permian Basin that is bigger than any place in the world. That's what I was told, even Saudi Arabia. So, but all the money in Texas, well, not all of it, but most of it comes from oil, the big money. And Dallas was set up where the banks were. You don't see the pump jacks in Dallas. You see them all over West Texas, East Texas. But in Dallas, there are more banks, I think, than anywhere in the world. It's crazy. There's this one area called Preston Center, and I forgot how many banks are in it. It's ridiculous. So, to make a long story short, getting back to my whole point with money and the pain that money brought me. So I thought, my husband, his parents were gone, and I thought, wouldn't that be the coolest thing? We will hire the old chef that trained under his father, open up a restaurant in the building that I had the Galactic Center, because everything kind of got going where we had readings on computer, where we didn't need to be in person anymore. I still had my readings, though, at the center in a section of the building, and we made most of it the restaurant. Okay. So, and it was a commercial building, so we were able to have a restaurant. We opened up Patry's restaurant, the second edition, and tried to replicate the menu and everything. And we're getting close to, see, both my parents died in 2004. It was horrific. First, my father died in January, and then in August, my mother died. And then after the horrendous ordeal over the inheritance, I took my money and opened a restaurant. I thought, here I can empower my husband and he can have a restaurant and I can do my astrology, and that's that. I was still even flying at the time. So then what happens is, going to the restaurant, it was getting close to 2008. It was 2007, I think, that we opened, and 2008 hit. The economy was worse than COVID, let me tell you, here in Texas. Everyone stopped going out to eat. And here I put, well, first we had a gift store, didn't do so well. Then the restaurant, it bombed. I was putting money into paying all the employees, into paying everything, to the point where I can go into the gory details, but I'll spare you. I lost everything. Here I was. I thought, as a child, I will never have to worry about money. And all of a sudden, I lost everything putting it into a restaurant. Let me tell you, astrologers out there, what do you think was going on in my chart at the time? You got it. Sati Sati. I probably should have known better as an astrologer not to open a restaurant during Sati Sati, but hey, it's 7.5 years, but I was in the deepest part of Sati Sati, where Saturn was coming right to my moon. And even though my moon is in the 3rd house, it rules the 2nd house of money. Saturn bump was on my moon. And here I had kids in college. Our house was falling apart, needed renovation. I stayed there because it was next to my parents. And all of a sudden, I really had lost all my money. Never in a million years would I thought that I would be in that position. Okay. I even, at the time, I was reading for some very influential people, my astrology, and around that time, The Secret came out. And around that time, it was a little prior to 2008, I think it was 2006 or 7, I was doing readings for 3 people that were actually in the movie. And one of my greatest clients and friends from that time was Joe Vitale. You guys have heard me talk about Joe many times. I've brought him on my Patreon and my Shooting Stars class. And he did the opening for my conference. Those of you that don't know who Joe Vitale is, he is Mr. The Secret, pretty much. He's one of the main people in The Secret. But I'll tell you something, law of attraction, that started up with The Secret. And really, it's the law of attraction was started, yes, it was before The Secret, but yes, I'm trying to think of who started it in San Antonio. But for that matter, continuing on, I was talking about The Secret. I was talking about the law of attraction all the time. And here I had this restaurant. My parents died. My sisters are fighting. It was the worst time of my life. And I actually lost all my money. And I'll tell you why. Because I had this deep hatred towards money and suffering, and especially the money that I received, particularly from my mother. After all the comments and the strings attached and the pain and suffering that I went through in order to have the nice things that they bought me. They let you know, and you pay the price. The cars they bought me, the clothes they bought me, the jewelry they bought me, trust me, it has a price to it. All right. So I'm talking to my youngest son, Austin, all the time about the law of attraction and, you know, what you have to do about changing your mind, changing your consciousness. And one day he looked at me, he goes, "You know what, Mom? You're a victim." And I was like taken back. It's like, you know, here I am talking all these things about The Secret. What you think you create. And I started thinking about it seriously, what he said to me. He was 100% right. I was a victim. Oh, the 2008, the economy. Oh, this restaurant. Oh, my parents. Oh, my sisters. All this stuff. Always the victim. And I kind of woke up. I said, you know what? I'm going to start walking my talk. Not just talking the talk, but walking the talk. And I did. And it doesn't happen overnight, trust me, because you always fall back into that pattern of being a victim. It's so easy to blame everything else for your problems. It's his fault. Oh, it's my husband's fault. He did this and that. And, you know, I'm the victim because I have to pay for everything. And I had to fly. And I had to do reading. You know, all of that. I was miserable. And I didn't know where the money was going to come for the school and education, for my kids being in expensive colleges, and the weight was on my shoulders. I wrote a book back then. It's actually called Awaken to the Power Within You. And that was the process of me putting together all of the pieces from The Secret and living them, talking about them in little segments of my life. It is on Amazon. I wrote it back in those horrible days. And a lot of it is a lot of my feelings in there that I was expressing. And it is only in Kindle form because it has so many colored pictures. The pictures give a description of the message that I wanted to present. So I thought if I made it visual along with the words, that would be meaningful. And because of the colored pictures, I went to go see if I could get it published, and the publisher told me it would cost $20,000. And after the restaurant, I didn't have that. So many years later, I published it just in the Kindle form because you don't have to pay for the colored pictures. I actually bought every single one of the images from stock photos to emulate the message, but all of those, I bought those. Because I have another book called Answers, which I'll make a whole video on that I derived and made before that. That is just images and pictures. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to write about money. And not that I'm trying to sell this book. I just want to show you this book came out of the torturous time of what I felt about money. And it's called Finding Money, Luck, and Fortune Using Astrology, Discovering Your Luck and Wealth. So in this book, I first, in the foreword, told about my situation with my mother and how she felt about money. And it made me sick. When she said the only thing in this world that matters is money, I wanted to throw up. And I actually said to myself, if that's the way the world is, I don't want to be in this world. I don't want to be in a world that only cares about money. So from that day on, I did everything to dissolve all my money, and I did. It was all gone, you see. But I wanted my kids to go to a good school. I wanted my kids to live the way I grew up, with comfort and going to Europe every year on trips and fun things like that. So I put my nose to the grind. I changed my attitude, didn't let myself turn to the victim anymore. And I wrote about money. In this book, I wrote about going back to the days, all the way back to the turn of the century, and how money evolved. I wanted to learn about money, what it's all about. And yes, I talked about the control and manipulation it has. I even put all the billionaires' charts in here. I wanted to learn what this whole process behind money is. That it is not what my mother says. That it's energy and it's to help people. And the more that you change your ideas about money, the more you'll have. You know, all those concepts. Do you think money grows on trees? Do you think money, there's always this indication that there's not enough, no matter how much you have. There's this sense of lack about money. I changed my attitude. I changed my belief. And it became a knowing, from a belief to a knowing, because that's what I always say. If you want something to manifest, you can't believe, you can't wish, you can't hope, you have to know. And I know I will get my money back. And so I worked, 3 jobs: astrology, flying, and running a restaurant. Finally, I decided it is not worth it to run this restaurant. I closed the restaurant down and put the building on that street, Lover's Lane, for sale. And then from that point on, I said, my life is going to change. Well, it's so interesting because our house was falling apart because, I knew it was a tear down. It was in a great part of town, but it was a tear down. The plumbing didn't work. Everything was broken. The electrical, everything, toilets, you name it. So my sons, who they went to the finest schools, right, before this, and they knew how living in Dallas at the top was what it's all about. So my son, Christian, said, Mom, you got to get out of this house. And I said, I know, I can't afford it. So he went around, scoured the neighborhood, because I love that neighborhood. I didn't want to move from this neighborhood. And he found this house, incredible house. And I'm like, there is no way I can afford that house. But went and viewed it with a real estate agent, and I'm thinking, that is my dream home. Okay, but no way. How are you going to, as the saying goes, squeeze blood out of a turnip? It's not going to happen. So the real estate agent had a banker, and he called, and she said, call him. He can make anything work. And that's where I came up with the blood out of the turnip saying. But she says, call him anyway. So I did. And he proceeded to check everything out that I had. And get this. And this is, I was really working the secret, right? I was really changing. And I was feeling happy, feeling good about money, writing the book that expressed my whole feelings during my worst period of my life. And by the way, you know what? You have this video to thank Anna Bay, who is one of my dear friends now. She told me to do this video because I told her this story, and she says, Joni, you got to tell that story. And I said, it's too heartbreaking. She said, but I think it's meaningful for people, and you'll see why. Thank you, Anna. Anyway, going back to the house, he called me and he said, do you know how much money you have in profit sharing with Southwest Airlines? And at the time, I was 58 and a half. And at 58 and a half, you can cash into your profit sharing with the airlines. I started in an airlines that was, I used to call Southwest Airlines when I started, a Rudy Poot rinky-dink airline. Only flew in Texas. We were so small. Everyone knew each other. By that time, Southwest Airlines had more takeoff and landings than any airline in the world. And I said, no, I won't give you how much my profit sharing was worth. But let me tell you, I had enough to buy the house and then some. And all of the girls that stuck with the airlines that long, from a measly little flight attendant, became multimillionaires. But my point is, that was the amount of money I lost that I gained. And I was able to buy the house. And here, once I moved into the house, I thought, there is no way. Well, this is the negative coming back. I probably won't be able to afford the property taxes or anything like that going forward. But I'm doing it anyway. I'm taking that leap of faith. And since I moved into the house, I've never been happier, because this was my dream home. I mean, I went from the pits. Remember, I have the Kalasarpa yoga, guys, and I tell you, the people that have the Kalasarpa yoga, they go from the highest highs to the lowest lows. But when you reach that low point, you rise again to a higher position than you were before. So then I got to work doing my astrology. And with my books, my astrology, and that was when I moved into the house. Pretty much I started with the University of Vedic Astrology, and everything I started doing started working. From a restaurant that bombed and I lost everything to great success, and practicing my belief in the law of attraction, changing my mindset completely. It's work. Because every time you think about your situation, I'll tell you, give you an example. One day, right after my parents died, I was so miserable. I was, I remember I was walking into the grocery store with my head hung low, get into the grocery store, my wallet stolen, and I actually had one of my diamond rings in the wallet. My wallet got stolen in the grocery store. I get out into the car, back into somebody, create a wreck, and it was like the spiral kept going down and down. Every minute I turned around, another god-awful thing happened because I was so negative and such a victim. I brought all these victim problems onto me. But once I started to change, I started to see my life change, and it reflected and reflected. And everything, I'm telling you, if you've had a great loss and you stay in the pits of your sorrow, in your misery, and keep looking back, you will never, ever rise again. But if you look forward and you don't look back and you change your thought process to abundance and wealth and prosperity and joy and love and happiness, your life will reflect that. That is a promise. I know because I did it for myself. And you know, probably a lot of people don't like me because I am successful. And that's something I'm going to tell you. If you can't be happy for people that are successful, you will never be happy. That is part of the law of attraction. And I know a lot of people don't like me because of that. And I do get to live in a nice, beautiful home that I love. And I do get to travel the world. And I do have joy and happiness in family. But I changed in order to create this world. And my point with this entire story is that you can too. If I did it, you can too. And that's my story about my suffering and loss and victimhood and money, and how the law of attraction and astrology, all of the above, it all works. So I hope that you can change and follow this path and experience. There is no such thing as lack. It's only in our head. We can have anything we want. And another thing is, with all these gifts, you can help others. You can help others with money and wealth. But most of all, you've got to teach others how to make their own money. Not just give them money, because it's like, you know, teach the fishermen how to fish. Don't just give them fish, give them the way to create it. This is the way. And this is part of my teachings. I teach this in my Patreon class. I teach this to all my students, even in the university, because this is the way to live a joyful, happy, abundant, prosperous, and successful life. You can have it and you can do it too. Thank you for listening to my worst, most heartbreak problems of my life and how I turned it all around.